Have you ever felt like you're always the one giving more? You show up, you help, you listen, you care, but somehow you're the one who ends up exhausted. Not because you did something wrong, but because you kept giving without realizing the cost of it. And this is something most people don't talk about. Niccolò Machiavelli recognized this hundreds of years ago. He witnessed kind leaders fall. He saw good people get betrayed, not by enemies, but by the very people they once helped. History doesn't just remember the powerful, it quietly reveals a pattern. Those who give without limits are often the ones who get used the most. And today, you're going to understand a truth that very few people are willing to face: the real cost of being too nice. Because being kind is not the problem, being unaware is. Think about it. Nice people often struggle to say no, not because they can't, but because they don't want to disappoint anyone. So they say yes to things they don't want, to people who don't give back, to situations that slowly drain their energy. And over time, something begins to change. People stop appreciating your kindness and start taking it for granted. It's like a well that never runs dry. At first, people are grateful, but eventually they just come to take water. No questions asked, no thought about how much is left. And maybe you've seen this before. The friend who only calls when they need something, the colleague who always forgets to help you back, a relationship where you give and give and give, but somehow it's never enough. And what's the hardest part? At first, you don't even notice it because you see the good in people. You believe that kindness will come back to you, that if you're patient enough, understanding enough, things will balance out. But not everyone lives by that rule. And realizing that doesn't feel good. But listen carefully. This doesn't mean your kindness is a weakness. It means your kindness was never protected. You were never taught that being kind doesn't mean always being available, that caring doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. You don't need to become colder. You don't need to stop being who you are. You just need to become aware of when you're giving too much, aware of when your yes isn't honest, aware of who only shows up when you have something to give. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And from that moment on, you stop giving out of fear. You stop giving out of habit. You start choosing. And the people who truly value you, they won't need you to give more. They'll respect you because you finally know when to stop. The hidden cost of being too nice. Have you ever felt like you're always the one giving more? You show up, you help, you listen, you care, and you do it without expecting much in return, because that's just who you are. But somehow, you're the one who ends up exhausted. Not all at once, not in a dramatic way, but slowly, quietly, almost in a way that's hard to explain. It's not the kind of tired that comes from doing too much. It's the kind that comes from feeling unseen, from feeling like no matter how much you give, it never quite comes back the same way. And at first, you don't question it. You tell yourself, this is just what being a good person looks like. You believe that if you keep showing up, if you keep caring, if you keep being patient, eventually it will balance out. Eventually people will see you. Eventually it will make sense. But over time, something starts to shift, not outside, inside you. You begin to notice the small things, the conversations where you listen, but no one asks how you are. The moments where you show up, but no one shows up for you. The times where you give and it's received, but never returned. And it doesn't feel right, but you ignore it because you don't want to seem selfish. You don't want to overthink it. You don't want to believe that your kindness could be costing you something, but it is. And this is something most people don't talk about. Niccolò Machiavelli saw this pattern hundreds of years ago. He watched kind leaders fall, not because they lacked intelligence, not because they weren't capable, but because they believed that being good was enough. He saw people with genuine intentions get betrayed, not by obvious enemies, but by those they trusted, those they helped, those they believed in. And what he understood was uncomfortable, but real. In a world where not everyone plays fair, kindness without awareness comes at a cost. Because when you give without limits, you don't just give your time, you give your energy, your attention, your emotional space. And over time, you start to feel it, not in a single moment, but in patterns. You start feeling drained after certain conversations. You start hesitating before saying yes, but still saying it anyway. You start noticing that something feels off, but you can't quite explain why. And the hardest part, you don't blame anyone. You blame yourself. You wonder if you're just expecting too much, if maybe you're the one who's too sensitive, if maybe this is just how things are. But deep down, there's a quiet truth you can't ignore anymore. You're giving more than you're receiving, and not in a healthy, intentional way, but in a way that slowly takes from you. That's the hidden cost. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't break you overnight. It just wears you down, little by little, until one day you realize you're tired in a way that rest can't fix. Because it's not your body that's tired. It's your energy, your emotional space, the part of you that kept showing up even when no one noticed. And this is where things begin to change. Because the moment you recognize the cost, you can no longer pretend it's not there. And that realization, that quiet awareness, is the beginning of something new, not the end of your kindness, but the moment you finally start seeing it for what it really is. How it happens, the pattern you didn't notice. So how does this actually happen? How does someone go from simply being kind to slowly feeling used, overlooked, and drained? It doesn't happen in one moment. No one walks up to you and says, I'm going to take advantage of you. It's much quieter than that. It starts with something small. You say yes when you could have said no, not because you had to, but because it felt easier than explaining, easier than disappointing someone, easier than dealing with that brief, uncomfortable silence. So you say yes, and in that moment, it feels right. You feel helpful, you feel needed, you feel like you did the right thing. So the next time, you do it again and again, until slowly, without realizing it, saying yes becomes your default, and saying no starts to feel wrong. But here's where something subtle begins to shift. People notice patterns, not always consciously, but they do. They notice that you rarely push back, that you're always available, that you don't complain, that you adjust. And over time, they stop checking if you're okay with it. They just assume you are. And that's how the line begins to move. At first, it's small things. A favor here, a little extra effort there, nothing that feels too heavy. But then it grows. A bit more time, a bit more energy, a bit more expectation. And because you've already said yes so many times, it becomes harder to suddenly say no. Because now it's not just about one request. It's about breaking a pattern you've been reinforcing over and over again. And breaking that pattern feels uncomfortable, even unnatural. So instead, you keep going, even when you're tired, even when you don't want to, even when something inside you quietly says, this isn't right. But that voice, you've learned to ignore it. Because being nice taught you something very specific. It taught you to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to make things easier for everyone else, even if it makes things harder for you. And over time, that becomes your role. The one who understands, the one who adjusts, the one who doesn't make things difficult. And people begin to rely on that version of you. Not the real you, but the version of you that always says yes. And here's the part that's hardest to accept. Most people who take advantage of this don't think they're doing anything wrong. They don't see themselves as bad people. They just see what's available. They see someone who never says no, someone who always gives, someone who always shows up. And so they take, not because they plan to hurt you, but because nothing ever told them to stop, because you never showed them where your limits were. And every time you stayed silent, every time you went along with something that didn't feel right, every time you said it's okay when it wasn't, you reinforced that pattern, not with words, but with behavior. And behavior is what people respond to the most. So the cycle continues. You give, they take, you feel something is off, but you ignore it. And then you give again until one day you start to feel it clearly, that quiet resentment, that subtle frustration, that sense that something isn't balanced. And for the first time, you don't just feel tired, you feel aware that this didn't just happen, aware that it was built slowly over time. And maybe for the first time, you stop asking, why are they like this? And you start asking, why did I allow this for so long? And that question, that honest, uncomfortable question, is where everything begins to change. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you understand how it happens, you finally have the power to stop it. Breaking the pattern without losing yourself. So, what do you do now? Once you see it, Once you realize that your kindness has been costing you more than you thought, what comes next? Because here's the part most people get wrong. They think the solution is to stop being nice, to become colder, more distant, more guarded. But that's not the answer. You don't need to become someone you're not. You don't need to lose the part of you that cares, because that part is real. It's rare and it's valuable. The problem was never your kindness. The problem was that it had no boundaries. And kindness without boundaries doesn't protect you. It exposes you. So the goal isn't to give less. It's to give differently. It starts with something simple, but not easy. You begin to notice when you feel that hesitation before saying yes, that small pause, that quiet voice that says, I don't really want to do this, before you ignored it. Now you listen. You don't rush past it. You don't silence it, because that voice, that's awareness. And awareness is where everything changes. At first, it will feel uncomfortable. Saying no will feel wrong. You might feel guilty, selfish, even anxious, because you're breaking a pattern your mind has followed for a long time. A pattern where your worth was tied to being helpful, to being liked, to being needed. But here's something important to understand. Not everyone will like this change. Some people will be confused, some will pull away, some will even try to make you feel bad for it, not because you did something wrong, but because they were used to a version of you that no longer exists. And that's okay, because the people who only valued you for what you gave were never really valuing you. They were valuing access to your time, your energy, your attention. And when that access changes, so do they. But the people who truly respect you, they won't disappear. They won't punish you for having limits. They won't need you to prove your worth by overgiving. They'll adjust, they'll understand, because real connection doesn't require you to lose yourself. And slowly, you'll start to feel the difference. You'll notice that when you say yes, it actually feels good, because it's a choice, not an obligation. You'll notice that your energy isn't constantly drained, because you're no longer giving it away without thinking. And most importantly, you'll notice something shift inside you, a quiet sense of control, not over others, but over yourself, over your time, your decisions, your boundaries. And that changes everything, because now your kindness is no longer something that gets taken. It becomes something you choose to give. And there's a big difference between the two. One comes from fear, the other comes from strength. One leaves you empty, the other leaves you grounded. And the more you practice this, the clearer it becomes. You don't have to prove your worth by giving more. You don't have to earn your place by overextending yourself. You don't have to say yes just to be accepted, because the right people, the ones who truly see you, they don't need that version of you. They just need you. And maybe for the first time, you begin to understand something that was always there but never fully clear. Being kind doesn't mean being available to everyone. Being caring doesn't mean abandoning yourself. And being a good person should never come at the cost of your own well-being. So you don't become less kind. You become more aware, more intentional, more honest. And in doing so, you don't lose yourself. You finally start protecting the part of you that was always worth protecting. What most people never realize, there's one more layer to this, something deeper, something most people never fully see, even after they realize they've been giving too much. And it's this: being too nice isn't just a behavior, it's an identity. It becomes a part of how you see yourself. You're the helpful one, the understanding one, the one people can rely on. And at first, that identity feels good. It gives you a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. You feel valued because you're needed. But over time, that identity starts to trap you, because now every time you think about changing, it doesn't just feel like a decision. It feels like you're becoming someone else, someone colder, someone less caring, someone you don't recognize. So you hesitate, you hold back, even when you know something needs to change. Because deep down, you're not just afraid of disappointing others, you're afraid of losing who you think you are. But here's the truth: you were never meant to be defined by how much you give to others. You were never meant to measure your worth by how useful you are. Because if your value only exists when you're giving, then what happens when you stop? What happens when you say no? What happens when you choose yourself? That's where the fear comes from, not the action itself, but what it might mean about you. And this is where everything starts to shift. Because the real change doesn't happen when you start saying no. It happens when you start seeing yourself differently. When you realize that you're not valuable because you're always available. You're not worthy because you never say no. You're not good because you sacrifice yourself. You're valuable because you exist, because of who you are, not what you give. And once that becomes clear, something inside you relaxes. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself through constant giving. You no longer feel guilty for having limits, because now those limits don't feel like rejection. They feel like self-respect. And that changes the way you move through the world. You start speaking differently, not aggressively, not defensively, but honestly. You say what you mean. You express what you feel. You stop hiding behind it's okay when it isn't. And at first, it will feel unfamiliar, maybe even uncomfortable, because you're no longer playing the role you've been used to for so long. But something else begins to happen. You start attracting different responses. People begin to take you more seriously. They become more aware of your time. They start respecting your space, not because you demanded it, but because you finally showed it. And yes, some people will leave. Some connections will fade. Some dynamics will break. But look closely. Those were the ones built on imbalance, on access, not respect. And when that access is no longer unlimited, they no longer know how to stay. But the ones who remain, they see you more clearly, not just as someone who gives, but as someone who knows their worth. And those connections feel different. They feel lighter, more equal, more real, because they're no longer built on what you provide. They're built on who you are. And maybe that's the biggest shift of all. You stop trying to be the person who is always there for everyone, and you start becoming the person who is finally there for yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a grounded, honest, sustainable way. Because at the end of the day, kindness should never cost you your peace. Caring should never cost you your energy. And being a good person should never require you to disappear. So you don't lose your kindness. You refine it. You don't shut down your heart. You protect it. And in doing so, you don't become less of who you are. You become more of who you were always meant to be. When everything starts to change, there comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. A moment where you realize you can't keep living the same way anymore. Not because you don't care, but because you finally see what it's been costing you. And once you see it, you can't go back. At first, the change is small, almost invisible. You pause before saying yes, just for a second, long enough to ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? And sometimes the answer surprises you, because for so long you didn't even ask. You just responded automatically, habitually. But now there's a gap, a space between what's asked of you and how you respond. And inside that space, you start to choose, not perfectly, not every time, but more than before. And that's how it begins. You start saying no in small ways. Maybe you don't explain as much. Maybe you don't over-apologize. Maybe you simply say, I can't do that right now. And even that feels big because it's new, because it's different, because it goes against the version of you that people are used to. And yes, some people will notice. Some will question it. Some will push back. Some will try to pull you back into the old pattern, not always in obvious ways. Sometimes it's subtle, a disappointed look, a comment that makes you feel guilty, a quiet shift in how they treat you. And for a moment, you'll feel that familiar urge to fix it, to smooth it over, to go back to being the version of you that made everything easy. But this time, you stop, because now you understand something you didn't before. Not every discomfort needs to be fixed. Not every reaction needs to be managed. Not every person needs to be kept. And that realization, it frees you, slowly, quietly. You start noticing the difference in your energy. You're not as drained after conversations. You don't feel that same weight after saying yes. Because when you do say yes now, it's real. It's chosen. And that makes it lighter, cleaner, more honest. And then something else begins to shift. Your relationships, not all of them, but the ones that were built on imbalance, they start to change. Some become distant, some fade out, some reveal things you didn't want to see. And that can be hard because even unhealthy patterns can feel familiar, comfortable. But if you look closer, you'll notice something important. The connections that required you to overgive to maintain them were never truly stable to begin with. They were dependent on a version of you that was slowly disappearing. And as that version fades, so those connections. But at the same time, something new starts to take their place. Healthier dynamics, more balanced interactions. People who don't expect you to prove your worth, people who don't need constant access to you, people who respect your time, your energy, your space. And those connections feel different. They feel calmer, more equal, more real. Because for the first time, you're showing up as yourself, not as a role, not as the nice one, but as someone who knows when to give and when to step back. And maybe that's the biggest shift of all. You stop trying to be everything for everyone, and you start being honest with yourself. You start protecting your energy without feeling guilty. You start valuing your time without needing permission. You start understanding that you don't have to earn your place in people's lives by giving more than you can afford. And the more you live like this, the clearer it becomes. You didn't lose anything by changing. You didn't become less kind. You didn't become selfish. You just stopped abandoning yourself. And that changes everything, because now your kindness is no longer something people take. It becomes something you choose to give freely, intentionally, without losing yourself in the process. And that is a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't just look good on the outside, but actually feels right on the inside. What you were never meant to lose. So maybe it was never about you being too nice. Maybe it was never about you needing to change who you are. Because if you look back at everything, your kindness was never the problem. It was the way it was given, without limits, without awareness, without protection. And over time, it cost you more than you realized. Not just your time, not just your energy, but your sense of balance, your sense of being seen, your sense of being valued for who you are, not just what you give. But here's what matters now. You see it, and that changes everything. Because once you become aware, you don't have to keep repeating the same pattern. You don't have to keep proving your worth by overgiving. You don't have to keep choosing others at the cost of yourself. And that doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. Honest about your limits, honest about your needs, honest about what you can give and what you can't. And there's something powerful about that, because real kindness, the kind that lasts, the kind that doesn't drain you, it doesn't come from obligation. It comes from choice, from clarity, from knowing that you are allowed to take up space in your own life. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to step back. You are allowed to protect your energy without feeling guilty for it. And the truth is, the people who truly value you will never need you to lose yourself to keep them. They won't need constant access to you. They won't measure your worth by how much you give. They'll respect you because you respect yourself. And maybe that's the shift this was always leading to. Not becoming less kind, but becoming more intentional, more aware, more grounded in who you are beyond what you do for others. Because at the end of the day, you were never meant to be everything for everyone. You were never meant to carry more than you can hold, and you were never meant to disappear just to be accepted. So you don't lose your kindness. You keep it. But this time, you protect it. You choose where it goes. You decide who receives it. And most importantly, you stop giving it away in a way that costs you yourself. Because the moment you do that, your kindness doesn't make you weaker. It becomes one of the strongest things about you.